carefully stored away in the seat of the British Parliament, Palace of Westminster, are archives which record these dark days of the monarchy. These are the papers on the abdication of Edward VIII, and they reek of misery and crisis. This is his address to the House of Lords, in which he says, "I will not enter now into my private feelings, but I would beg that it should be remembered that the burden which constantly rests upon the shoulders of a sovereign is so heavy, it can only be borne in circumstances different from those in which I now find myself." And you then get the act of abdication, which went through both houses of Parliament, all of its stages, in a single day. That's a sense of crisis for you. And then here is the royal assent to that, and it finishes with the great red seal by the king himself, signed with his own hand, and his own hand is on the front of the document. Edward R.I. Edward Rex Imperator, King Emperor. And by writing that signature on this document, he ceases to be king. So it's the only example I've ever seen, and may exist, of a signature which destroys itself. Amazing. With barely time for the country to take it all in, the Queen's father was crowned King George VI. 11-year-old Princess Elizabeth was a little shocked to realise she would have to move into the drafty Buckingham Palace. But she caught the sense of magic, writing of the coronation. I thought it all very, very wonderful, and I expect the Abbey did too. The arches and beams at the top were covered with a sort of haze of wonder as Papa was crowned. At least I thought so. Papa was only 41, and the prospect of her own reign must have seemed unimaginably distant. But that quiet little family, her mother's sense of fun, her sister Princess Margaret's mischief, what they called "we four," would now be changed forever.
That's our royal family. And it's a family whose joys and sorrows are much like yours and mine, I suspect.
The new King George VI moved his family out of the comfortable and familiar house in Piccadilly and into the grandeur of Buckingham Palace. Imagine what it must have felt like for the young girls, and the shift certainly pushed the father and his older, rather serious 10-year-old daughter, who he now knew was going to be queen, much more closely together. It was a pretty intimidating, drafty old barn of a place.
Yeah, and pretty austere and some fairly strange working practices as well. But I mind the working practice has been going there for a long time. I think even in Queen Victoria's day, I think that she or Prince Albert complained, you know, that there were 3 different departments that were responsible for a fireplace. So there was actually maybe 4. I think one was responsible for cleaning it, another one was responsible for laying it, because the forestry department had to produce the logs, and somebody else had to light it, and then another department had to look after it. I mean, it was absolutely ridiculous. He's got a lot better since then.
Her childhood was comfortable, but not exactly crowded. No random friendships, city streets for looking down at, not for walking on. Remarkably, even then, security issues, including Irish Republican threats, loomed over the girls. Elizabeth and Margaret lived in a world dominated by family jokes and private games, often played in a kind of anti-palace, hidden away in the grounds of Royal Lodge, Windsor. The people of Wales gave Ubuthin-Bach, the little house, to her on her 6th birthday, and here she'd play and read books, beginning a tradition that now includes her granddaughter, Princess Beatrice.
Granny and her sister played here growing up, and we've been lucky enough to play here, and cousins and second cousins, and it's a big family treat. It's the most glamorous Wendy house ever, but it's really beautiful, and what you're seeing in the house now is after sort of a year renovation.
Which you've been in charge of?
Yeah, well, I was one of the people, but it's completely been rethatched, and new curtains, new wiring, new sort of bit of a spruce up, really, because it was such, it's such a wonderful little place that, if you want to have a look inside.
Can we see inside?
original 1930s fridge in the house. And Granny was was very clear that all the fabrics she wanted very little designs because it was such a little house that she, sort of gone for very little flowers and rosebuds, and we have some quite new modern friends that have made their appearance as well. But
she spent many happy hours and days here as a girl.
yeah, she did, and still now she likes to come back and visit, and it's it's wonderful that we can have say Granny's a great grandmother now, so we can have Savannah come and play in here as well. More great grandchildren in the future.
As a child, Granny never went to school. When her mother was urged to get her more books, they all turned out to be comedies by P.G. Wodehouse. But she learned French, and she was taught about the Constitution by an eccentric history teacher from Eton. More important, the new king was passing on his own advice, and despite his stammer and lack of readiness for the role, was growing in confidence himself. He refused to leave London during World War II's Blitz. The Queen Mother took up pistol practice in the palace grounds in case she had to make a last stand against German paratroopers. And they visited the battered East End.
Upon hearing that yet another London hospital had been bombed, their Majesties visit the scene to bring comfort and cheer to all those who have suffered from this all too frequent form of Nazi frightfulness.
On September the 13th, 1940, King George VI and Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, were very nearly killed when a German bomb landed right here in the quadrangle at Buckingham Palace. If the window in the room where they were standing had been closed rather than open, they would have been hideously mutilated by flying glass. A workman nearby was killed. Showing fine British phlegm, one of the policemen there turned to the Queen Mother and said, "A magnificent piece of bombing, if I may say so, Mum."
Within a few yards from where the King and Queen were sheltering, the Royal Chapel was struck. Tearing through the roof, the bomb completely wrecked the altar and hurled 20 tons of debris into the basement. We thank
to the whereabouts of the princesses was a national secret. In fact, they were at Windsor Castle, from where they made a radio broadcast to the children of Britain.
Thousands of you in this country have had to leave your homes and be separated from your fathers and mothers. My sister Margaret Rose and I feel so much for you, as we know from experience what it means to be away from those we love most of all.
You only have to look at pictures of the Queen's father before and after the war to see the toll it took on him. A dramatic aging. But this was also the time when the ties were more tightly bound.
I think that was the time when the Queen got closest of all to her father. And to see him wasting away in front of her, and you wondered, was she aware, even as she's losing her father, and can see his mortality, what that means for her, and how that's going to limit her own personal life.
He was really the only person from whom Princess Elizabeth could learn about how to reign, how far to go with the politicians, how to do the paperwork. He'd become a revered symbol of the British, reliable, constant, still in his mid-50s. For her, an anchor. And then the cable snapped.
George VI's death came on the 6th of February 1952, here at Sandringham, the private estate he loved so much. His daughter was then 25. She had 2 children of her own, but this sudden death pitched her straight into the public and private world of remorseless meetings and duties, which she's always taken with the same kind of dead straight seriousness that she learned from him.
She was considerably younger than you are now when she became Queen. Do you ever sort of reflect on what an extraordinary jump that must have been from a relatively private life suddenly thrust into that role at her age?
Yeah, definitely. And one of the things that's also really struck me when I sort of look back at it now was also in a very probably male-dominated age, where it must have been extremely daunting to be put in that position. And that age, I still have trouble trying to be serious about certain things. So for her at that it must have been incredible having that burden and that responsibility placed on you.
She's shouldered the responsibility since then. One day, after his father, it will land on Prince William's shoulders. But what is the essence of that responsibility? What's the point of a constitutional monarch? What really is the job for? Well, first, the Queen is head of state, and the state is a political creation. One of the most important of the monarch's duties is something the Queen has done thousands of times: her weekly audiences with the British Prime Minister. These meetings mostly happen here in the deep privacy of the Queen's apartments at Buckingham Palace. The Queen's first Prime Minister was Winston Churchill, a titanic figure. She found a great speaker.
The Queen can do no wrong.
He saw things in a very romantic and glittering way.
But perhaps a less good listener. Since then, she's had 11 British Prime Ministers alone, and at the heart of the relationship are those totally confidential conversations, compared by one official to a weekly meeting with a therapist.
I mean, certainly here one can't take it in, but there it must be even more traumatic, mustn't it?
It's simply two people sitting down talking in an entirely relaxed and informal way. But they cover everything. I mean, the Queen as head of state has a right to know what is happening, has a right to know what her Prime Minister has in mind to do.
I certainly found I could discuss anything with her in total confidence, and that included, by the way, all sorts of cabinet ructions and difficulties.
As the Queen has grown ever more experienced and grown older, and her Prime Ministers have grown younger, the balance has changed. Perhaps the most pivotal, important premiership of all was that of